On today's episode, you'll hear how a former nonprofit executive turned a small project into a national platform helping Black-owned businesses grow, market smarter, and reach more customers. This is the Be a Marketer podcast.
Be a Marketer.
My name is Dave Charest, Director of Small Business Success at Constant Contact, and I help small business owners like you make sense of online marketing. And on this podcast, we'll explore what it really takes to market your business, even if marketing's not your thing. No jargon, no hype, just real stories to inspire you and practical advice you can act on. So remember, friend, you can be a marketer, and at Constant Contact, we're here to help. Well, hello, friend. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Be a Marketer podcast. That means, of course, the one ready to keep me honest as always. Please welcome back Kelsey Carter. Hi, Kelsey Carter.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing really good, actually. It's a Friday as we're recording this. Actually going to be heading into the Boston office today to spend some time there. And then the wife and I have a little show to go see tonight. So I'm very excited about that.
I know. I'm jealous.
Good times. You know, so we've got an interesting conversation here today. And I think what's cool about it is when business owners really think beyond just their immediate scope, right? And so what I mean is by that is they kind of, it actually reminds me a little bit about was Jackie Liberto, right? Who we had on the podcast before, how she was in real estate, but she didn't just sell or buy homes. She actually built a whole ecosystem around her business in terms of like everything that a customer would potentially need or a client would need in that real estate journey, right? And I think there's something in this episode too that's a little bit about that thriving ecosystem, right? Where you've got businesses, you've got partners, you've got customers, you've got tools that really support and sustain long-term success. And what I like about this is it's not just for his business, but it's for the other businesses that he's trying to reach. And our guest story today really, I think, shows how marketing isn't just tactics, it's about creating this connected system that really empower people. Kelsey, tell us a little bit about who we're talking to today.
Today's guest is David Derryck. He's the founder and CEO of BuyBlack.org, based in Oakland, California. It's a mission-driven platform that helps consumers find and support Black-owned businesses across the country. What started as a passion project during the early days of the pandemic is now growing into an ecosystem with over 50,000 listings and counting.
Yeah, I love this. So David's story is really a great example of how, starting with a clear mission and taking the consistent action can really lead to real momentum for your business. So he's combining digital tools, community partnerships, and really just smart content to help Black-owned small businesses grow and get discovered. In our conversation today, you're going to hear about how David grew BuyBlack.org, as you mentioned, from 10,000 to 50,000 listings and his plan to keep scaling that, how he uses education, email, and automation to bring value to his member businesses, and why showing up in your community online and in real life builds trust in many ways you can't always measure. Kelsey, let's go to David as he shares the moment that this idea became more than just a platform, it became a movement.
I read an article from a woman at Columbia University, and she said in a quote, people always talk about what would they have done during the time of slavery or during the civil rights era. And the answer is whatever you're doing right now. And so when I was sitting there, I was literally reading this on the same screens I'm talking to you at, working from home. And I thought, what am I doing? What is it that I'm actually doing? So at the time, I had been working with a nonprofit financial technology organization, doing good work, enjoying it, making a difference in people's lives, but started really thinking about what else could I be doing? So what I took from that was kind of the launch of a passion project. So really, over the next couple of years, 2020 to about 2022, started trying to apply my business kind of acumen, if you will, to sort of what is happening with wealth inequality, what's happening with businesses, how are people finding businesses? And so I started Googling and thinking about, hey, look, there are no real directories out here at the moment. So you Google Black-owned business and you get a ton of lists, 10 companies to support.
Like blog posts and stuff, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of those. And so then I started thinking about, well, what if we really thought about, can we consolidate them into one place so that people are able to just go to one site and actually find these businesses and support them? So that was sort of the genesis of it, was a passion project over the past couple of years. And then in 2022, jumped into it full time and said, okay, let's make this what you do.
Wow. Okay. So if our research is correct, right? 2022, that's when you kind of jumped into this. You had about, what, 10,000 listings at that point, if I'm correct? You left your job to do this full time. And there, I guess, depending on where you look, right, there's about 2 million Black owned businesses in the US. Well, there's a couple interesting things here. I guess, like, one, it's only around like 2 to 3% of all businesses, right? So I feel like that's actually a pretty small number, right? So hopefully we can
Right.
get that to grow. But I guess, I mean, is the goal for you to get all of these businesses listed?
So, I think in the beginning, I was like, 2 million, that's the holy grail. And I
Right?
thought about it like Google thinking of, we're going to, digitize the world.
Yeah.
And I said, we're going to find 2 million. Then actually, after doing some research, you kind of get into the real number. So the 2 million is really everyone from a sole proprietor to a large business. So when you kind of cut down into some of the numbers, there are roughly 140,000 Black owned businesses with 5 or more employees.
Hmm.
So we started thinking a little bit more about, okay, what and who will we get to? So I think for us, our holy grail shrank a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'd say we're probably thinking about, can we get somewhere in the neighborhood of around 250,000 businesses? So that would include sort of all of the ones who have employees, and then I think an additional 100,000 who are small proprietors. The mix of our directory right now is predominantly small businesses, obviously many who have employees, but mostly it's small businesses, mom and pops, that range everywhere from, plumbers, tradespeople to online retailers and everything in between.
So I think there's probably a couple of lessons in there. Like, one, I mean, that idea of narrowing the focus maybe a little bit, right? To get to, all right, we're going to hit focus on this area. I think probably in many ways made some things easier for you, which I want to get to in a moment. But I guess the question is, where are you today? How are we looking now?
Sure. So fast forward today, we have a little over 50,000 listings on the platform. We will probably continue to grow that. We should hit about 75,000 by the end of this year. And so I would say the bulk of the businesses are, as I said, small businesses, restaurants. We have a lot of restaurants, a lot of shopping, and shopping meaning all kind of retailers under that large umbrella, and then everything in between, tradespeople, as I mentioned before.
Yeah. So how do you get to 50K? Like, what are you doing to get people to, and I don't know what the process is, right? Are they registering for the site? Like, do you have to vet people? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah. So we do a couple of different things. So one of the things we did was, as a small business ourselves, we looked at sort of, I mentioned Google and kind of how do they do things. We also looked at Yelp and kind of thinking about them as really like a playbook kind of approach. So we've done a couple of things. One is using technology. We certainly pull data from public sources and start aggregating all of those components. The second thing we've actually been pretty successful at is having individuals who come to our platform who are referring businesses as well.
Okay.
So as we've actually been able to, one of the ways in which we've been able to grow is to have people say, hey, do you know about these businesses here? Do you know about these businesses here? And so we'll actually get people sending us lists themselves, like, here are the 5 or 10 companies in my neighborhood. I've looked on your site and I didn't see them. You should be pulling these folks in. So it's a combination of using technology, using people, using publicly available data sources, and increasingly trying to create partnerships with other organizations who have that data to bring them into the platform.
Got it. Well, speaking of partnerships, what can you tell me about your connection with Constant Contact these days?
Great. So with Constant Contact, we first established a relationship earlier this year, met at kind of a conference looking at small businesses. And one of the things that sort of tied the two of us together was the fact that we've got lots of small businesses, many of who are trying to figure out, how do I market? How do I actually get out into the world? Sort of our mission just as an organization is to drive traffic and revenue to Black-owned businesses. And so we're always looking for ways in which, how can we help them drive traffic and drive revenue? So with Constant Contact, I think one of the things we realized was, certainly on the email front, how do we continue to, consistently communicate with people? How can we make it more dynamic? How can we use it to establish relationships, better relationships with our member community? And so working with Constant Contact now, I think one of the things we're starting to explore, because we're still relatively new in our partnership, but we're starting to explore really ways in which we can drive things like webinars, registrations, engaging opportunities, and try to figure out, A, how do we use it internally? And then secondly, how do we actually make it available to our membership base as well, who are also looking for ways to, incorporate AI into their marketing streams, do better with the email and other pieces.
Yeah. I love that it goes beyond just the directory, right? I think in terms of your mission and what you're talking about here, I love that there's that education component to it because I think as we know, right, there's so many businesses that do get started and to your point, mom and pops and all of these things that they have an expertise, they have something that they do, but when that marketing bit comes in, right, particularly how fast everything is changing these days, like that becomes a limiter in many cases, right? Because you've got to keep up with that. So I love that you're actually approaching it from that perspective where it's not just like, yeah, get on this platform, but it's like, let's get on this platform, but also let's give you more skills so you can actually move your business forward too, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Aside from just the listings that we're talking about here, there's a couple of other things that I know that are important to you. Can you talk to me about the role of certification in empowering Black-owned businesses? Like, what does that mean and why is that important?
Sure. So certification is something that's been around for a while. Obviously, we're in a kind of a, I don't know, discussion, if you will, like sort of a political discussion. Is DEI important?
Mm,
But really, if we look back historically, what certification is that it certifies that a business is minority owned. But these certifications range from you could be minority owned, LGBTQ plus, women owned, veteran owned, small disadvantaged businesses. So there's lots of designations that the U.S. government has already established. And so certification is one way in which Black owned businesses are able to say, hey, I'm a Black owned business. And the benefit of that is essentially that many of the Fortune 1000 companies, as well as states and local governments, are looking for ways to identify and find diverse companies. And so for us, when we first started, somebody asked us, maybe we were a week or two old, they were like, oh, so are you a certified business? And I was like, we're not certified yet. so, and so one of the things we found was we did a little research and saw that there's literally billions of dollars being spent from corporates and local state governments for businesses. But when you turn around and you say how many of the businesses are actually certified, the number is actually really low. For Black owned businesses, I would say it's certainly less than 25% are actually certified. And so part of what we think about is you should be able to get some sort of certification because it makes you available for other types of contracts that already exist.
mm,
But then more importantly, when we started looking and thinking about, are there ways in which we could actually, if somebody knew you were certified, would that increase your sales? Would that increase revenue? Does that affect people's social impact, sort of the way in which they think about their conscious spending? And the answer is increasingly seeming to be yes. And so we're really trying to think about, how can you get certification? Obviously, from a business standpoint, that just works for corporate dollars. But really, when we think about it on a consumer front, most consumers don't really know if a business, they don't know who owns a business.
right.
You walk into a store, you don't know if it's woman owned, LGBTQ friendly. I mean, there's all kinds of different pieces. And so we're thinking about certification to really be a way in which you can tackle both the corporate community, but also really to start tackling and making yourself known to the consumer market, which is really, I think, where most of these businesses are going to be selling to.
So for my clarification, where does this certification come from? Is this like a government thing or is this something that you're putting in place? Like, how does that all work?
Oh, sure. So the government has set out, SBA has a pretty clear set of guidelines.
Got it.
And then
Okay.
there are third-party certifiers. So there are a few companies out there who do certifications for all companies in the United States, and you can apply to them. And so we work with one third-party certifier at the moment, and hopefully we'll start working with others as well.
So are you trying to make that connection? So like, let's say somebody joins your site as part of the program. I use program loosely. I don't know if that's what you actually call it, but part of the platform. Are you then trying to make those connections to people to make sure that they can at least know how that is something that's available to them?
Yes, so that's exactly it.
Got it.
Actually, so this is, I think, a good tie-in terms of some of the things we're working with Constant Contact to do. So part of it was thinking about, one of the things we said was, we were using a smaller email client and having a little bit of difficulty. So we were thinking about what are the ways in which we can create automations and such. So this was actually a really good scenario. Is that when we have people join our platform, the first thing we did was we actually just, sort of sent out some mail blasts, if you will, like,
Yeah.
okay, you joined. Hey, we have this. Are you certified? If yes, click on this button and
Got it.
kind
Yeah.
of that process. And so now what we're trying to do though is actually make it a lot more integrated. So when people come into our platform, we're building out sort of the automation so that somebody gets, sort of there's the welcome series of things that you get. But then the next part is also really thinking about what are the services we can provide. So that dovetails into are you certified? and sort of a quick yes, no. And, if they think of that tree, yes, great. Who's your certification with? Can we get that certification? Because we can do something with that. No, then there's sort of a drip campaign that follows afterwards to say, here's the reasons why you should be certified. Here's some examples of certification. Here are the opportunities that could present itself to it as well. And so we're trying to really think consciously about what are the tools and what are the services that we can bring to these small businesses that aren't just sort of another product that you need, but really products that are going to add value to your business as it is.
So, well, talking of like things that start to add value and start thinking about just in terms of like growing a business, yours included, but just even the businesses that you have come onto the platform, if you start thinking about digital advertising, it's an area that can also be confusing for small business owners, right? So tell me about this concept of digital advertising co-ops. Like, what does that mean and what does that look like?
Yeah. So part of what we've been trying to do is, and again, this is year 3 of our company. So we're definitely still in the iterating phases of things. But one of the things when we started thinking about how do you drive traffic and revenue, right? Like marketing is the key. So, how do we drive traffic to our site? How do we attract more eyeballs? And so one of the things we first did was we said, okay, like everyone else, oh, you got to do some advertising. You've got Google, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. You've got all the different platforms and ways in which you can do some digital advertising. And so, of course, we jumped in, we did some keyword campaigns, and we realized, all right, we need a lot more money to actually make this sustainable. So just thinking, I think from a small business standpoint, we've had some talks with folks and said, so what do you really need to start an ad campaign? The first number we heard was like $30,000 to kind of get the algorithm to recognize you and start thinking about what you're going to do. And then you've got to have thousands to, actually run the campaign. Little back of the envelope math, you talk to a few of our members, we're like, how much money do you actually spend on advertising in any given year? And the number is, maybe $5,000. So you just kind of think about that.
Not in
like,
those move the needle numbers that we're talking about here, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we said, all right. And so we started thinking about it. And we too were like, there's no way we can actually advertise ourselves into existence. And so one of the things we did, what we're working on is we said, okay, well, we own our own website. We use an open source ad server. And so we're able to run ads on our site. So we started off kind of very organically thinking about, if you come to the site, we should tell you about the different products that we have, or different services that you might have. So yes, you could find something like minority certification. You might find these different pieces. And then we slowly said, all right, well, given that we control the costs and they're pretty minimal, let's open this up actually to some members. So we started off with people who are effectively our premium members. And we said, all right, we can offer you free advertising. What we want you to do is to actually give us your graphics, your images, and we're going to run these ads. And the premise behind this was really the fact that, at first they were like, well, is this a catch? Like you're going to start charging me in 30 days.
Yeah.
What's the deal? What we really wanted people to understand was that when you're marketing, brand awareness is probably to us the key thing, is that you've got to actually have some consistency in the marketplace in order for people to start thinking about you, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, when they're actually thinking about making that purchase. So when we first started with this concept, we figured we're going to give you 1 year free banner advertising on our site. And so, right now we've got about 50 advertisers on the site, and that's continuing to grow more rapidly as we've just gotten more sophisticated. And so part of this is now some companies will run national ads if they have that capability, so retailers. And then many of the companies, though, are local companies. So they're just running, let's call them city-based ads, or we could go back to zip code, but, it's geographically targeted. And what we're starting to now think a little bit about is, as this brand awareness continues, it's actually strengthened our community aspect. So you can imagine at first the advertisers were excited because somebody's going to run their ads. But what it's turned into then is that slowly those people are actually starting to reach out to others, to their network to say, hey, you should be joining this platform. They do real things. They're standing behind their mission of like driving traffic and revenue. And so I'd say probably what we're happiest with is that the statistics that we get are basically similar in terms of click-through rates that you would have if you were running ads on Google or other places. So they're not sort of, off the charts where folks are getting 5 and 10% click-through rates, but they're in that same 1 to 2, sometimes 3% kind of range. And what it's been very helpful, I think, with is actually getting these companies to realize, all right, now I've got brand awareness happening, and it's something that They're changing their ads every kind of 90 days because they'll say, okay, I should refresh it. And so I think what we're seeing is that it's a good opportunity for us to build community while keeping through to our mission. And I think over time, our goal is to then think about how do we expand that. So you were mentioning before a little bit about the certification component. And so now what we're experimenting with over the next couple of months is we're going to add kind of a certification badge to some of these ads and to see, does having a certified sort of BuyBlack certified badge on your ad, does that actually drive click-through rates? Does that drive additional traffic to those sites?
Got it. Got it.
Maybe.
I think what's interesting too is, I mean, you also are somewhat offering, again, in an educational way, but through doing versus just conceptually talking about, like, you're giving people a chance to really kind of get their feet wet with some of this stuff, right? To see, oh, okay, like what does work, what doesn't work, and almost opens the door for getting to that place where you start to feel more comfortable to make an investment and not just be wasting dollars, right? But actually be investing them in a way that is going to give some type of return, which is ultimately what we want with advertising, right? So I love that.
Right.
So, well, speaking of, right, getting a return and those types of things, when you think of, buyblack.org itself, how are you measuring impact just in terms of what you're doing for the businesses listed, yourself, and even just the community at large, right? Like, how are you looking at all of that?
Yeah, so we've got a few key metrics that we follow. So one is the size of the directory, just in the sense of we've realized the larger the directory grows, essentially the more traffic it starts to attract. And, that sort of, can we create that virtuous cycle of the directory grows, more traffic on the site, more traffic to these businesses. The second thing we start looking at is for businesses, we also have a marketplace where people are able to buy things. So we look at sales through that marketplace. So are people seeing actual increases in their revenue? And then I think the third thing that we are starting to really explore is to seeing what I'd call sort of like the sticky factor.
Mm.
Are we starting to see people come back to the site more often? I think probably the areas where we're kind of focusing a lot these days is we recognize people are coming to the site with an intention. So people are coming very specifically, I'm looking for, fill in the blank. I'm looking for a restaurant. I'm looking for a plumber. I'm looking for a mover, et cetera. And so I think the thing we're starting to see is, are people able to find that and get a good response out of that? And then second, are they coming back to do it again? So we pay a lot of attention to thinking about, we want to see both our unique users grow, but we also want to see time spent on the site increase as well as repeat users coming back. So it's sort of that balance, as you look through Google Analytics and you're just trying to, all right, how many are unique users? We want that to go crazy, but at the same time, you need everyone who was there once.
You want some repeat visitors,
twice,
right? Yeah,
3
exactly.
times,
Yeah,
4 times.
yeah,
Right.
Well, so you mentioned premium members earlier, and I'm curious. I mean, is that how BuyBlack itself makes money? Is it through like premium? It's a membership model. Is that what we're looking at here, or?
Yeah, so we have a membership model where we do have some premium. We have a premium and a free version.
Okay.
So we generate revenue from our premium members when they get, prioritized in search. They get a little bit more service in terms of the advertising and a few other kind of bells and whistles on that side of things. The other place we do earn some revenue is from our marketplace. We get a small commission based on sales through that as well. And then I think the third area is, while we are giving ads away free for folks in this beginning stage, we are looking and thinking about how can we put together really what I'd call a pay for performance type of model.
Got it.
So in that case, we're really trying to think a little bit about, if you can imagine free tiers, you're going to be shown making these numbers up, but, sort of once every, you get 25% of the rotational capacity versus the premium folks may get sort of the other 75%. So they'll get seen more often than shown in that piece. But again, trying to think a little bit how we align ourselves with our customers is that we're not looking to really be pay-per-click or CPM driven. What we're really trying to explore is, can we do something perhaps where I'd say it's more akin to like an affiliate type of program. So if someone sees your ad, your product, they click on the ad, they purchase that product, we'd rather take some sort of an affiliate fee, some percentage, whatever that percentage might be, and have that actually be the reason, so that you're winning as the advertiser because somebody actually purchased something, and we're winning as well because we were the ones who put that ad out front. So that's sort of the other piece of what we're trying to drive our revenue model towards on the advertising side.
So we mentioned, being able to kind of go with the background, right? Look at the dashboard of Google Analytics and see what's going on from a website perspective. But there are also things I think that are important to your mission and what you're trying to do. And just, I mean, in the world, right? Like when you think about like, there are things that actually you can't measure on a dashboard. Talk to me a little bit about your participation in the African American Day Parade.
Oh yeah. So that was recent. That was just 2 weeks ago. So there's a parade, African American Day Parade. This was the 55th annual one. And it runs in Harlem up 7th Avenue, which is just sort of like the central corridor of Harlem. And for us, we were looking earlier in the year, and this is part of that sort of community development story, is that we have an advertiser who runs outdoor events in Harlem, participates in lots of different festivals, and does a film festival. And we were trying to figure out, we were like, oh, this is great. What are some ways we as a brand could actually get out in front of not only businesses, which is who we usually are talking with, consumers are using our site. I don't think they think about us as more than, hey, it's a great site for me to find these things. So they may have heard of us this way. And so we were trying to find a way in which we could also sort of announce ourselves to the community as well. So kind of one of those serendipitous things, we were looking on the website thinking, oh, this would be great if we could, they have a float. This would be great if we could be, how do we get into a parade?
Yeah.
And it was one of those moments where you look through and we saw it and we were like, hey, we can actually afford to sponsor a float. So we pulled the trigger and just said, let's do it. And this kind of timing wise, this was probably in July, that the parade was just in September. And so we were a little bit nervous of, are we going to get all the things we need to get done? But fast forward to the event, and it's honestly one of the highlights of my 2024 because two things I think happened. One, businesses who we work with in Harlem were actually able to participate and joined us on the float. So that was sort of a nice way for us to reach out to folks and actually tell them about an event and get them on board. And then secondly, when we got into the actual parade, it's sort of surreal because you're on this moving float, but it's slow enough and it's in a community in which we were able to jump off the float, hand out stickers, hand out t-shirts. So we were able to give away essentially merchandise, BuyBlack merchandise. But at the same time, you had people really seeing the brand, cheering for you. Many in Harlem saying, I buy black. This is great. And so you just sort of got the vibe of, all right, this is fun as a business. We get a lot more feedback regularly from our businesses saying, kind of things that are going well and sometimes things that are not going so well. But I think this was overwhelmingly one of those moments where I thought like that question of why did I start BuyBlack and thinking about because we really want to try and change and address the fact of can you drive that traffic and revenue to people? And this was, I think, really for us, the first consumer side where we just saw people saying yes and anxiously or excitedly rather thinking about the brand and talking about it. What was even better is a couple days later walking around in Harlem and seeing our t-shirt actually being worn by people, that we had thrown out. So to me, it was one of those moments where, from a marketing standpoint, everyone's question to me immediately was like, so how much more traffic did it drive?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, the good thing is we had QR codes. So there was some things you could see. So there was spike in mobile downloads because people were scanning it and it's got some geotagging and we saw some spike versus other times. But I think more importantly, this is one of those moments where it was less about the analytics, more about the goodwill that I think that it actually drove from people seeing it and saying, I either do this or I know this is something that's happened before. And just sort of feeling, just one of those things. Yeah, the intangible feeling you get when it's just sort of excitement in a crowd and people cheering for you. It was just fantastic.
Why do you think that experience impacted you the way that it did?
I think what it was most important to me was that people shouted out without any kind of prompting, and I think the fact that some people would say, I buy black or this, yes, this is great. Sort of just, it was a reaffirmation, I think, in terms of like move the business forward, So I think as many entrepreneurs, you have those lulls and moments of, oh, yeah, why am I doing this? I could go and do something else. And I think the fact that people were out there and it resonated without needing to say, hey, what do you think about this? Just simply the spontaneous sort of emotive responses of people is perhaps to me the most powerful. And then I think on a personal note, it was great. I have two kids who were there as well. And so they, I think it was also one of those moments where they were like, They see me at the home
Yeah.
office, they see me, going to the co-working spaces and building this, but it took on a tangible kind of situation for them. And they could feel it, and they both left saying, like, wow, all right, we know what you do, because there's always a
Yeah.
joke.
Yeah.
What do you actually do all day?
Yeah. 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 That's actually an interesting thing, right? When you start to think about, particularly today, when we do have these screens, I mean, amazing things that happen, right? Amazing you and I can have this conversation right now, right? But also, sometimes it takes particularly when you start thinking about where we're going with AI and all these things, right? Like you start to really take that human piece out of the equation sometimes, and you forget that, oh, wait, David's at the other end of this conversation, right? You're on the other side of this computer. And there is something unique and special about experiencing the impact in a face-to-face situation that your business and the work that you're trying to do or the things that you're trying to accomplish are having, right?
Agreed. It was one of those moments, like I said, handing out stickers, shaking people's hands,
Yeah.
and people saying, "Stop a moment, let me take a picture, let me hold up the stickers." Just
Yeah.
as you said, I think it's one of those things where we forget. Yeah, talking to the customer is like number one. Just all the time. And so for me, it was summed up because we have a friend who was like, "I'm going to ride on the float," who's extremely critical of most things. And at the end, she said,
Oh, one of
she said,
those friends.
yes. She said, "You know what? That was great. You should do it again."
Awesome. Awesome.
And I was like, all right, well, that's it for us. So
That's a win.
we will be doing it in 2025. And we're excited
Awesome.
because, this was a first year, get our feet wet and kind of just be in it. But I think next year we'll be able to do it in a much, much more inclusive way and bring a lot more of our community into the parade, which I think will be fantastic.
Yeah. I think what's also interesting is that you can take those experiences too, and at least those conversations, and those things actually help inform like what you do, right? From a marketing perspective. Because I think there's something to understand too. Like a lot of times as humans, right, we don't necessarily act rationally, and there are emotional components to the things that we do and the decisions that we make. And you don't always see that part of it, right, in the black and white in terms of like a screen, right? Or what the
Right.
numbers say. And so I think that's interesting that kind of brings that into the fold, that helps inform the things that you can do creatively, messaging wise, and all of that stuff into the work that you're doing digitally or whatever the case may be, right? Question for you, actually. Where are you based? You're based in New York?
No, we're based in Oakland, California.
Okay. All right. Great.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. Well, so I want to kick us over into like more marketing stuff. So as you get into this, I mean, where would you gauge yourself just in terms of level of experience with marketing?
So I would say this. I feel like I'm a good guerrilla marketer.
Okay.
I would say, I think still trying to get a real understanding of the science of marketing.
Mm.
So I would say I've got some advisors who are really good marketers. And so thinking a lot of times about what we need to understand more around how to do some of the research, how to do some better testing in terms of messaging. And I would say I'm a student of marketing, really still at this stage, but recognizing how important it is in terms of growing the business.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good place to be, right? Like know enough to kind of move forward, but be a student of it. Because I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what marketing is. Like you have to be a student because everything, particularly how everything changes all the time and you learn and move on to something to build on, right? Who's involved with the marketing now? Like, do you have a team? Is it just you? Like, what does that marketing component look like for your organization?
Yeah, so marketing is really, it is, well, we're a small team. So
Sure.
we're actually a team of 5 at the moment
Okay.
in terms of building up this business. But our marketing is sort of what I'd say we've got a brand manager who does all of our graphics, brand design, brand kit, making sure we stay true. In the beginning days, I'd say we could use whatever colors we want to use because it'll look better. So when she came on board, she actually was like, "No, you cannot.
Yeah. Slow down.
This is
Slow down,
yeah,
pal.
slow down.
Listen, David.
This is the brand guide. When people say, 'Hey, do you have a brand guide?' You send them this. These are the colors they can use. These are the size. These are the fonts, the sizes, all of that." So I think that was sort of my first recognition of like, okay, but, there's some formal processes that we actually need to adhere to. Then I have somebody who's more of an advisor who had done brand management and marketing for larger companies and is now does that individually. And then we have a third person who really works specifically on the email campaigns and building those pieces out. So we're a loose group, but pretty nimble. I think the big challenge for us is really, I think one of the big challenges and opportunities is thinking about how do we use AI to actually help in some of these marketing aspects. So I think we've become a little more nimble with things like when we're thinking about email subject lines, email preview sentences, kind of getting those pieces together and getting those things out. And then also where we do things with our blog posts or other types of articles and such, using AI to actually generate the images and finding probably the balance, I think, with AI for us is getting really close to what we want, but not needing it to be perfect.
Right.
Just recognizing also that, somebody told me once, they were like, people aren't looking at that image as closely as you are.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
They were like, it's got to look good, but
Yeah.
it doesn't need to look perfect.
Right. Right. But I mean, that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people, right? Somebody's explained it to me, and I think it's a good way to think of it, right? Think progress over perfection, right? You got to get it to a certain point where it meets some standards that you have, but
Yeah.
don't be like nitpicky enough to like not get the benefit from hitting post on the thing, right? Instead of just
Right.
waiting around, right? You mentioned some interesting things because I was going to ask you, yeah, what do you find challenging and how do you start to overcome those challenges? And I think you even talked about, I mean, maybe we can schedule some time at some other point to come back when you start implementing some things with like automation and stuff like that, because I think you're thinking about that in the right way, like just in terms of how you're going to use Constant Contact to help with some of that stuff.
Right.
I want to talk about some of the things that you found to be effective when it comes to marketing. And I know some of the things that we kind of touched based on a little bit was like engagement-based editorial calendars. So what does that mean and how do you implement that in what you're doing with your marketing?
A few things that we've realized for our marketing, we think a little bit about, and this comes back to the engagement for both members as well as consumers. And so what we've started to do is really there's two things, but one is we're constantly putting out articles, on a daily basis just to keep the content moving. And we've actually started using this, and this is something we'll be using Constant Contact for, is starting to put in just sort of a kind of a cadence of, there's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And we're working on kind of linking an RSS feed or our
Got it.
site to Constant Contact so that every 3 days a week, all of our members are getting essentially a digest of Black business news. And so that has been really powerful for us in terms of getting that going because it effectively keeps people up to date on news that they're just generally not seeing. And so to me, the highlight on that is that our unsubscribes is still less than 10.
Yeah.
That was like the key thing. I was like, oh no, how many people are going to unsubscribe once you start getting these emails? But then I think more interestingly, we started thinking a little bit about our consumers. And so in that case, we were thinking, how do we continue to drive this revenue piece? And so we've set out sort of an editorial calendar where we look at every week we set we call it BuyBlack Friday. So there's always there's the Black Friday that comes around Thanksgiving. And we said, every Friday should be BuyBlack Friday. And so what we do is each week we take a different type of theme. Today's a Friday. So today went out with toys and games, and we identify Black owned businesses that are either in our network or outside our network. And we send people 10 items with a little blurb about them, with a little blurb that they get each week. So each week we're seeing good take up because people are seeing different pieces. So the editorial side ranges from, we do a few different things. We do some that are just product based. So it might be clothing, might be toys, games, coffee, you name it. You can do sort of those product selections. And then the other thing we'll start adding in as we get into sort of Q4 will be a little bit more thematic. So it might be something around 10 brands that you might want to take a look at. It could be around travel and have some stories that are baked into it. I think as we go and we take a look at what consumers and folks are looking at, we're trying to push the envelope a little bit more to kind of get a little bit more editorial viewpoint into it, sort of our 2 cents, if you will, of these companies and why, versus just sort of 10 products,
Right.
click and buy. Right.
Well, I think that's important, right? Sometimes we can err to the side of not having a point of view in many instances, but oftentimes that's the human connection part of it, right? Because we want to have somebody that, whether we like it or we don't, right, is invoking that emotion. So I think that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. And that too has been something that we've started and will continue to do. And again, what we're find is it's a two-way street. I think the consumers enjoy it because frankly, it's brands. And again, it's that thought of we're always fighting our behaviors, and so there's sort of that component of and Amazon, rightly or wrongly, has made us all believe everything should come tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I should be able to return it anytime I want to really easily.
Yeah.
And so it's been this really interesting balance because, for a lot of these small companies, some of them sell on Amazon, many of them just sell through their own website, but trying to get them to recognize that the consumer is still the consumer. You can say, I want to support a Black owned business, And I want it to also fulfill all
Right.
the things that I want anyhow
Yeah.
for any business. And so I think it's a good place where we're finding the businesses are excited to be highlighted in it, and we're getting actual feedback from them. And then we're also getting good feedback from the consumers. And we're evolving over time. We actually just did a couple of pieces which were just Amazon based sellers. So these are Black owned companies on Amazon, and that's where they sell their products from. And that's just feedback because we had somebody who was saying, what about these products? What
Mm.
about these products? And we were trying to figure out how could we get them in. What we're finding about the editorial piece is that it's a two-way street. People read it and then they comment. Like they will email you back and say, I want more fill in the blank. And we've got to respond to that. But I think it helps to create that connection and the connective tissue with our folks.
Well, and in so many ways, a great thing to have, right? Because I think it's so easy for people to, I mean, it's one thing when people are just complaining, right? But there's another when people actually is something gets a rise out of them enough to want to comment, right? And to give feedback and they care enough about it to provide that to you. That in my book is like a huge win, particularly and again, it's so easy for people just to ignore things, right? That like if you have that, like it's a huge boon, right, to move forward with. And I think, in many ways, it starts to help highlight who your community is, right? Particularly if you have like repeat voices or you can start to see the same things kind of happen. And again, those might be smaller scale moments, but again, those interactions are things that you can build on to reach a broader base of people, right? Talk to me about what you're thinking from a gamification area in terms of like building community and doing those types of things.
Yeah. So that is, I think, where for us, it's where the real world people's activities meets, I think marketing and meets the product all at once. We're doing a few different things, I think, that are pretty interesting. The goal for us is trying to figure out how do we actually get more of that feedback and more of those touch points from both our businesses and our consumers. So what we're about to launch is we have an app right now which has some pretty basic components in it. You can find city guides, you can find products, you can kind of do sort of the normal app activity. And then the first thing we've actually done is that we do have a little treasure hunt that's existing in Oakland at the moment.
Okay.
This is sort of like version one. I think we as an organization, again, we're still in these beginning stages. And I think we're taking full advantage of the fact that we don't have anything hardened, if you will. So we're
Yeah.
sort of willing to try things and see what happens, and kind of get feedback and grow from there. So on the treasure hunt side, what happens is somebody's able to actually open up the app and we've laid out, a variety of different places you can go. And when they go to these places, they can take a picture, give a rating, and ultimately frequent that place. So we look at it as sort of really it's an opportunity for discovery. So if you just got some time and you're like, oh, I want to go to this, I want a new place to go eat. Let me check this out. And when you show up, it's all, geolocation on your phone. So you can get directions to the place and give you a little challenge. But the second thing we're really starting to think about is that works well in sort of a local kind of area, but how do we gamify a larger component? So
Mm.
back to that question of if 250,000 businesses is where we want to get to, we have two ways to get there. It's either sort of constant research and finding and pulling and aggregating data. But the second part we really think about is, but what if we could get people to actually be more involved in this? So we're thinking a little bit of over the next few weeks, this is actually being built. So we've got some developers working on this now. What if we gamify? So every time you give us some referral, you're going to get some kind of points and loyalty program.
Yeah.
What if every time you leave a review, you're also going to get these types of points? So thinking about the actions we want people to take and how do we reward them from those components? So for us, the challenge is from the merchants who wants to participate and getting those folks on board. And then secondly, then from the individuals, them being able to say, okay, let me refer somebody, let me refer a business, let me visit a place and do those types of activities. So that's sort of where we see gamification headed. As again, the treasure hunt, we've done some tests and it's been well received. We've started doing a little bit of just the referrals just to see, hey, will people refer? And as I've said, we've been getting them unsolicited. But to think if we can actually figure out a way in which people, if you get 10 and, certain, think of all the loyalty types of mechanics that you can employ with it. But that's really where we're going to be heading with the gamification side. If you went on our site these days, we've done also some interesting things with gamification, the light gamification with our loyalty program, where in the background you were actually getting starting to be able to take advantage of some of these things, fill out a survey, fill out,
Oh, got
again,
it. Okay. Yeah.
business and those pieces.
Got it. So I guess I'm curious, how do you get to this place where, or how do you, I guess, balance, right? Promoting both, you've got the business side of things where you're promoting to Black owned businesses, right? Where you're trying to get them on the platform. But as we've been talking here, you've also got the consumer side of things. What are
Yeah.
you learning? What are you finding? Like, how do you strike the right balance of what you need to do there to make this thing successful?
Dave, you've hit literally the question that,
The big question. This is the big one.
yeah, this
All right,
is
we
the
gotta
one
hunker
that
down. We
keeps
gotta.
me up.
Well, we've got 5 minutes, so if you can figure it out, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
I mean, I think that's the hardest thing that we're
Yeah.
trying to figure out. I think this is probably one of these things. So actually, one of the things I'm hoping with Constant Contact that we're going to be able to solve on this is we want to be able to really send sort of a single, call it email,
Yeah.
per week, which actually addresses both of those parties. We're 100% struggling at the moment with the fact that we send out emails to the businesses,
Yeah.
we send out emails to the consumers, and then there's moments where inevitably we're like, but they should probably get the same thing here, or they're interested in this. But because of the way the days are set up, it's one of those moments of it's just, it's sort of a spaghetti soup at the moment. Right. So I think right. So I think we're trying to figure out, I mean, that's the big question is like, can we figure out a way in which we can send the right information to the right people dynamically
Yeah.
on a weekly basis so that they get it when they want it? And, in today's world with personalization, I think that's the thing we're really thinking through
Yeah.
is we're about to send out a survey next week that's literally asking like, do you want these topics? Would you like them on a specific day? How much do you want to personalize them? Because I think as we've slowly moved forward, what we're finding is that people do want personalization.
Yeah.
I want it on Mondays in the morning.
Yeah.
You might want it on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and someone else wants it 7 days a week. And I think with technology, and certainly as we look through these automations and such, the triggers and things are there. I think for us right now, what we're struggling with is probably just stepping back,
Yeah.
and mapping out the full process. Because I think that to us has probably been, as we're trying to balance the different things, just taking the time and saying, okay, we need to actually step back, map out what are the different inputs from a content perspective, and then how do we allow people on the back end to say, I want A, D, F, and G,
Yeah.
and I want them on these days with this frequency.
Yeah.
And we know it's feasible.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think you'll be interested and have a good time really kind of digging in there. And I think it's warrants, maybe in the future, once you've had some things running after a while and get things going, we could come back and see how that's working out for you. But I think as you start thinking of like dynamic content, to your point, even like things like click segmentation, right? Starting to think of what actions are people taking? What are the triggers? Then allow you to send more timely and relevant information and do those things like you're mentioning where you're just sending one email, but what's in that email that the person is receiving is changing based on who they are, right? I think all of that stuff is stuff that you'll have a fun time getting in there and digging in. So that'll be cool.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the end of our time here, David. And so I want to give you an opportunity to really just, thinking kind of about the future and where you're going and where you want this platform to go, right? When you reflect on what you've learned so far up into this point, and as you move by BuyBlack.org, into the future, I guess, what are some things that are standing out to you right now?
I think the thing that stands out to me most is I think there's a clear recognition in this country that we've been on, like wealth inequality exists, revenue inequality exists. And I think there's a clear recognition that people want to fix that, or at least bring it closer in, the disparities closer. And so I think one of the big takeaways for me has been that, a mission driven business, which is what we are, we're organized actually as a social purpose company in California, is that it's relevant today. And so I think that's probably the first piece is that we are seeing a change, I think, in the way in which businesses operate. And we like to think of ourselves as being a part of that change and being at the forefront of thinking about how do we balance a business and a mission and really be a mission-driven organization. I think the second thing that comes to mind is how do we help small businesses actually reduce the friction of getting to their customers and increasing their revenues, increasing just their success overall. And I think what we're finding though is at first we've thought about it from a platform perspective, but I think the real eye opener for me has been how do you develop partners to work with. So I think in this case, as we think about like Constant Contact, frankly, when I first was thinking, I was like, oh, we're going to use this internally. And then realizing, well, wait a minute, these are actually tools, and our relationships with some of these partners can help to actually carry that through or be the pass through to saying, all right, here's how you also can remove friction. We did a webinar actually last week with Constant Contact and our members thinking a little bit about AI, and just hearing the members ask questions about AI, then seeing like, here's some answers and here's a platform I could actually take advantage of, I think was one, it made me feel good, just as a fact of like, hey, we're making this available to our members. But I think it reinforced for me the fact that it's an ecosystem that we have to develop. Our platform alone will do 1 inch of the movement, but it's through all those other relationships that you establish and build that you actually get that, you start to build and see the real change. And then I think the third thing that I would say is sort of my big takeaway is community matters more than I thought, as we said, about sort of like the digital world and all you have to do is connect to people digitally and you do this and do this and this and these things happen. But I think, like you said, the tangible piece of like going out on that float and seeing people and touching folks and actually being with people who believe in our business, some who knew about our business, many who didn't, most I'd imagine who didn't. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of people literally, along the parade route. I wish they all knew who we were, but we had a different place. But I do think from the community standpoint of really seeing that I've moved from thinking about it just not only do we have community members and members on our platform, but we have stakeholders, and I think that fact that there's other people who are seeing all of the pieces together actually make the whole, and that's what's important. And you've got to interface and work with these other groups in order to actually be successful. I continue to be excited, about the fact that we're growing this ecosystem. Marketing is obviously a key component because that's what's growing it, is that people are seeing that there's value by being associated with ourselves or with other parts of that ecosystem.
Well, friend, let's recap some items from that discussion. Number 1, use automation to deliver value beyond your product. David's team is using Constant Contact to send a welcome series that not only greets new members, but helps guide them toward getting certified, something that can unlock new opportunities. Now, for your business, map out what your audience needs after they sign up or purchase a product. Then build a simple automation to deliver the information they need step by step. Number 2, don't underestimate the power of brand awareness. Now, BuyBlack.org offers free digital advertising to premium members to help them build long-term recognition, not just short-term clicks. Now, for your business, you don't need to have a big budget to stay top of mind. But remember, consistency, even in small ways, adds up over time. Number 3, get direct feedback to refine your content. Now, David's team listens closely to what their audience wants, like Amazon seller spotlights, for example. And then they adjust their editorial calendar to reflect that information. Now, for your business, watch how people engage with your emails and social posts. Then, let their engagement and responses shape what you do next. So here's your action item for today. Set up an automated email in Constant Contact that asks one simple question to help you organize your contacts into smaller lists or segments. For example, David would ask a question like, "Are you certified?" or "Are you a consumer or a business?" You can use that information to deliver more relevant content. You can even use click segmentation to automatically build those segmented lists. This will help you build better relationships and, of course, get better results. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Be a Marketer podcast. Please take a moment to leave us a review. Just go to ratethispodcast.com/BAM. Your honest feedback will help other small business marketers like yourself find the show. That's ratethispodcast.com/BAM. Well, friend, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and continued success to you and your business.